All right, with some hot news today, our buddy from Sports Illustrated, Chris Mannix. Thank you so much for joining us today on a busy news day, Chris. I really appreciate you taking the time. Go ahead and tell the fans what you just broke on SI.com.
Well, there is a broad agreement on a deal between Ryan Garcia and Tank Davis. And what I mean by broad agreement, they have agreed to most of the financial terms, whether it's the guarantees for both fighters, the split percentages of the pay-per-view revenue, which is often a significant obstacle to overcome. They have agreed on the weight. It would be at 136 pounds, which is 1 pound above where Tank usually campaigns at. And Ryan, who has been at 135 but fought the last fight of his at 140, he would come back down towards that weight class for the fight. They've also agreed on a tentative date, which is January in Las Vegas. So that's what's agreed on at the moment. The next big obstacle, and it's a big one to overcome, is how you get past the broadcast issues. Tank has been aligned with PBC, of course, and has done his last 11 fights on Showtime. Golden Boy, they have a contract with DAZN. Ryan Garcia has a contract with Golden Boy. DAZN has done most of Ryan Garcia's fights since he started to elevate his game 3 or 4 years ago. I don't know the exact number of fights, but it's 5, 6, something like that. And now we're kind of waiting to see what happens and if these two networks can get together and find an equitable arrangement.
Yeah, is that possible? Knowing that both, understandably, would want this fight on their network. Can this happen? Or, I mean, for the sake of boxing, it needs to happen, right?
Well, let's answer the question of, is this possible? Of course it's possible. We just saw Tyson Fury and Deontay Wilder do it. They did it 2 fights that were huge fights, enormous successes. And even though Wilder lost, I think we both agree he was kind of elevated in those moments, going toe-to-toe with Tyson Fury. Both those were on Fox and ESPN pay-per-views. It worked out well, seemingly, for everybody. So it absolutely can be done. But what it's going to take is both sides understanding that this fight, in all likelihood, cannot get done unless both these networks are involved. And I don't believe that we are there yet. One thing I found interesting in reporting out this story was, like, you can say it certainly is true that in an ideal world, DAZN would put on this pay-per-view by itself. In an ideal world for them, Showtime would put on this pay-per-view by itself. But DAZN, who I work for, obviously, as a broadcaster, but they have made it clear that they are willing to do kind of the shared pay-per-view model that we talked about. Look, if contracts had been agreed to with Anthony Joshua and Tyson Fury, that would have been a dual pay-per-view with BT Sport and with DAZN. So they understand what goes into making a deal like this happen. They're willing to do it. Showtime wants to do it by themselves, but I think the greater piece of information that's here is that in the discussions between Tank's side and Ryan's side, it has been presented as, by Tank's side, this being a Showtime pay-per-view. So what I'm saying is Showtime has not necessarily, from what I've been told, been authorized per se to negotiate a co-pay-per-view. They've been told, look, this is what we're offering Ryan Garcia. This is the way it is. What I would hope to see happen in the next coming days is Stephen Espinoza with Showtime, the people involved on that side, receive a go-ahead from Al Heyman and PBC to find a co-promotional deal. Because look, I just don't see how this fight gets done without both networks being involved.
Yeah, and again, kind of back to that secondary question that I'm sorry I threw in there at the last second, but we just had Errol Spence Jr. and Terrence Crawford fall apart. We're staring at, seriously, Chris, the possibility of this year, the biggest pay-per-view being a Jake Paul fight. For the sake of boxing, these guys need to get along and make this happen.
And this is why I not to editorialize too much, but this is why I can't handle the Jake Paul criticism, because boxing could eliminate Jake Paul in a heartbeat if they just made big fights. I mean, who would be talking about Jake Paul if we had Spence and Crawford on the table for November, if we had Tank Ryan on the table for January? Boxing created the lane for Jake Paul to kind of drive his Corvette through, and he's done exactly that. I just look, this is obviously a very different situation than Crawford and Spence. Crawford and Spence were aligned on the network partner. It was going to be a Showtime pay-per-view in November. They just couldn't agree on the money. And this deal, the money, for the most part, has been largely agreed to. They just can't figure out the network issues. I have been told by people on both sides that this is a significant week for it. Like, they've got to find a way to make progress on this deal on the network side, or else you're going to see very quickly both sides go in a different direction. That could mean an Isaac Cruz rematch for Gervonta Davis. For Ryan Garcia, it's a little bit murkier. He's now fighting at 140, and we'll see who they want to put him in with at that weight class. But Lance, it'll be a pretty big letdown, I think, for both their next fights if we don't get Ryan Tank over the finish line.
Yeah, obviously, I know that you referenced some of the details that were haggled out. Did you get any believable assessment of like who got the better of the purse split? I would assume that Gervonta is getting more. Any of those details get really kind of fortified in your mind?
Yeah, I don't have the percentages able to report them anyway. I do know that Ryan's side has acknowledged that Tank is the A side in this. Like that was expressed to me. Like they know that Tank is the bigger side, the A side in these negotiations. Tank's numbers speak for themselves. He is a proven draw at the box office. He does solid numbers on pay-per-view. And Ryan's getting there. I mean, Ryan is drawing pretty big crowds himself, doing seven-figure gates himself, has not been on a pay-per-view yet, but does significant numbers for DAZN on its streaming service. But they know that Tank is the A side in all this. And look, this is again one of those things where the hope is that with the two sides coming to an agreement financially, that there can be some pressure applied on the network side to get things done. Because I understand why both networks need to be involved. I mean, Showtime, for 11 fights, has done a phenomenal job building Tank Davis into the star he is today. On the same side, DAZN has invested a lot of money in Ryan Garcia. And why should they sit on the sidelines when Ryan takes the fan base and takes what he's built on DAZN to another network? So, and again, it's not complicated. We know that. You and I both know that. You can make a deal involving multiple networks on a pay-per-view platform. It is not a difficult thing to do. Hopefully in the next few days, a week at most, we see some progress there.
I've always said, Chris, right from the start, let me run one network, you run another, and we'll make this happen. But the last thing, Chris, I mean, we got to be honest. Not only is this a great showdown, I mean, the power of each guy is so special and rare and unique, but their social footprint is so massive. This fight is going to do so well, right? It brings in the young audience. Everything that Jake Paul wants to do, I mean, this is amplified times 10 who these guys are and their significance, not only as fighters, but as personalities.
I mean, if you think about it, outside of a Joshua Fury fight next year, there's no bigger fight in boxing, at least commercially. Spence Crawford, obviously, for the boxing purists, is a bigger fight. It would establish arguably the number one pound-for-pound fighter in all of boxing. But this is a monster. It does bring together two very different fan bases who are both passionately in support of their fighters. It'll do a gate well in excess of $10 million wherever it goes. It'll do, I would argue, well north of 500,000 pay-per-view buys. I think there's that big an audience for both these guys to do that kind of number. You just got to get together. You got to come to the table and find a way to make it work, because there's too much money for everybody to make in getting this fight done.
Absolutely. Hey, fingers crossed, Chris. Thank you so much for bringing some good news to this sport after what we dealt with last week. And again, thank you for interrupting your day with us. We really appreciate you. Keep up the good work, and we'll see you soon, buddy.
Fingers crossed, man. Fingers crossed. Right.
Thank you. Good job, Chris. Thank you.
All right, you got it, bud. See you soon.